Hello, and welcome back to the Crime Reel. For this week's true crime narration, we shall be looking at the life of Michel Vaujour. Michel was born on the 16th of January 1951 in Saint-Quentin-le-Petit, a small village in the Ardennes region of France. At the age of 4, Michel was abandoned by both of his parents and placed into the care of his aunt. Just 4 years later, when Michel was 8, his aunt died from cancer and Michel returned to live with his parents. Not only did he have to deal with the loss of his aunt at a young age, the main carer that he had ever known, he was now living with his violent, alcoholic father. By the time he was 19, he was working in a local factory and had his first run-in with the police. He was arrested for stealing a car and sentenced to 30 months in prison. After serving his sentence, he was released from prison in 1972. But the following year, he was arrested again, this time for driving without a license. He once again found himself in prison, but this time he was determined not to stay. In 1973, he escaped from Mâcon prison by making a ladder and climbing over the wall. The authorities caught up with him shortly afterwards, and he was sentenced to 4 years in prison in Chalon-sur-Marne in southeastern France. In 1975, he once again escaped. This time it is understood that he managed to make a copy of a key from an impression which he had made in some wax coverings from cheese. Again he was captured, and whilst in prison in 1979, he married his girlfriend Nadine. Before the year was out, he had escaped prison for a third time. After taking a judge hostage using a fake gun, he was able to make his escape. This time he managed to stay on the run for longer. In 1980, he managed to escape rearrest when he shot and wounded a policeman who attempted to pull him over whilst he was riding his motorcycle. Michel, along with his wife Nadine and various other accomplices, robbed banks to support their lifestyle. The authorities eventually caught up with him in 1983, and he was eventually sentenced on the 8th of March 1985. He received an 18-year prison sentence for the attempted murder of the police officer in 1980, a charge which he denied, and a 1981 bank robbery which he admitted. However, Michel had no intention of serving his time, and an elaborate plan began to form. Around 1983, Nadine began taking helicopter lessons under a fake name and later managed to obtain her license. 3 years later, their plan was put into action. On Monday, 26th of May 1986, 35-year-old Nadine, accompanied by a man carrying a large sports bag, went to the Saint-Cyr aerodrome just outside of Paris. Here they met with the 47-year-old owner, Claude Roumet, where Nadine, claiming to be Lena Rigon, rented a white Alouette 2 helicopter. There was nothing unusual about this, as Nadine had rented this same helicopter on numerous occasions in the preceding 6 months. The rate for this rental was around 2,200 francs per hour. That's the equivalent of around 650 euros today, or in dollars, about 800. She always paid for this in cash. After takeoff, she flew over central Paris, ignoring the radio warnings that she was flying below the legal altitude limit. She had soon completed the 19-mile journey and was approaching the Prison de la Santé in the southern part of Paris. Meanwhile, in Building 3 of that prison, 34-year-old Michel and another inmate, 28-year-old Pierre Hernandez, were threatening the guards with a pistol and hand grenades, allowing them to escape to the roof. At around 10:45 a.m, The helicopter hovered over the prison. Nadine's accomplice, armed with a machine gun, slid down a cable and hoisted Michel up into the helicopter. The accomplice was then pulled back into the helicopter. The trio then made their escape, leaving behind Michel's accomplice, Pierre. 15 minutes later, at 11 a.m, the helicopter came into land at a soccer field near a student campus in Port de Lyon. The surprised students saw 3 people run from the aircraft and quickly leave in a waiting car. By the time the police arrived, Michel, Nadine and their accomplice were long gone. Fearing that the helicopter may be full of explosives, trained dogs were used to check that it was safe. It was found that the pistol used in the escape was fake, and the grenades used to threaten prison guards were actually painted nectarines. Despite extensive police surveillance of Michel and Nadine's families, the pair still managed to collect their 2 daughters, 12-year-old Marlene and 5-year-old Betty, from Nadine's mother, who had been caring for them at the time of the escape. The family then moved to a small town near Palirac in the Dordogne area, where they managed to live a quiet life unnoticed by their neighbours for several months. However, it wasn't long before, once again, their criminal tendencies won over. On the 27th of September 1986, Michel, along with 2 accomplices, 40-year-old Francois Clat and Francois' brother-in-law, 35-year-old Philippe Jacquemont, robbed a bank, getting away with around £500,000, the equivalent of around €150,000 today. At around the same time, Nadine was tracked down to a hideout in the Dordogne, where she was arrested and returned to Paris for questioning. The following day, the 3 men tried to rob another bank in eastern Paris. The police raced to the crime scene and a gunfight followed. At that time, the police had no idea that they were engaged in a shootout with Michel, the famous escapee. As the battle continued, Michel was shot in the head. He was taken to Pity-Salpêtrière Hospital, where he was identified from his fingerprints and unique tattoos. Despite extensive injuries, Michel survived and remained in a coma for several weeks before slowly starting to recover. He suffered from hemiplegia, where damage to the brain or spinal cord causes weakness, muscle problems, and paralysis on one side of his body. Once he had recovered enough to leave hospital, he was again convicted and returned to a maximum security prison where he was held in isolation. During this time, he was contacted by a law student, Jamila, who was 18 years younger than him. Over the following 10 years, the pair exchanged thousands of letters, which ultimately ended up in Jamila becoming his second wife in 1999, following his divorce from Nadine. While serving his time, Michel took refuge in yoga, which enabled him to regain control of his limbs. Eventually, with the help of Jamila, he decided to attempt to escape once again. For once, this attempt was unsuccessful and resulted in Jamila receiving a 7-year prison sentence of her own. In 2003, at the age of 52, Michel was finally legally released. He had spent over 27 years of his life in prison, 17 of which were in solitary confinement. He has since released an autobiography entitled Love Saved Me from Sinking, in which he talks of his newfound love of clean living, patience and yoga. That concludes today's story on the life of Michel Vaujour. Thank you for listening to that. As usual, please add any comments down below. I'll be interested in reading them. I hope with today's pronunciations they were at least a 5 out of 10. Please bear in mind that when I was at school I was told by my French teacher, at least when he gives up this subject he won't have much to forget. Thank you, teacher. Thanks once again for listening to The Crime Reel. Stay safe. Goodbye. Psst. One of my favourite phrases in French that I learnt and remembered, ma mère est une hamster. Au revoir.